Hi everyone, I'm Anna, co-founder of Crossdressed UK and wife of a crossdresser. We're really excited to be joined today by Dr. Z. Dr. Z is a licensed clinical psychologist with 20 years of exclusive focus on transgender, non-binary and gender non-conforming adults. She's joining us today from the US, and we're really excited to sit down and have a conversation around gender exploration and cross-dressing. You will have to excuse me today. My voice is a little different. I am full of cold, but we'll do our best. Hi, Dr. Z. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Oh,
We're really pleased that you could sit down and we can have this conversation. So for those out there that maybe don't know you, are you able to tell us a little bit about yourself, your background, the work that you do?
yeah. Well, first of all, thank you so much for inviting me to your podcast. I'm always happy to talk about gender and gender issues. I'm Dr. Z, and I'm a clinical psychologist situated in US, and and for the past 20 years, really, been focusing working solely with transgender and non-binary adults. And that's pretty much all I do, and I absolutely love my work.
Oh, that's lovely. Yeah, we obviously found you on Instagram. Big fan of the things you share on there, which is why we were really keen to have a chat with you and just sort of understand your perspective on things. Really, we do know that there's sometimes differentiation between the languages that are used over in the US compared to the UK. But obviously, when we came up with the name for Crossdressed UK, that was primarily what we sort of were wanting to go down the route of with, providing support for cross-dressers and their partners. But we actually, I think we speak with lots of people on the gender expression um, scale. So, that kind of covers trans, non-binary, gender fluid, people who are just exploring or questioning. So yeah, I think this is why it's important to have conversations like we are doing today. Um, so if we were to think about cross-dressing then, what would you define it as? What would your definition of cross-dressing be?
Yes, cross-dressing is a word that I find tends to mean different things to different people and tends to imply different things to different people. In general, when I think about the cross-dressing, I think about just simply a behavior that somebody engages in where they are crossing what their culture would consider gender norms within the binaries of the paradigms of gender. Um, in the United States, it's very interesting because the word has taken on a very different connotation over the time, especially in transgender community. For example, for a lot of trans women, the word cross-dressing can be very triggering, very uncomfortable, understandably so, because if you're a woman and you are expressing yourself as one, you're clearly no longer cross-dressing. Clearly, at that point, you are just being you. Another word that people use is feminizing. So it's very interesting to observe how the word has taken on different connotations. I think for a lot of people, it can start as a behavior of exploration. For a lot of people, it also a behavior that they engage in because numerous reasons that have nothing to do with gender identity, and that has everything to do with how they feel about the behavior and what benefit they derive out of the behavior. So this is why I also wanted to speak to you today, because it's such an interesting conversation that has gained so much misconception and taboo and misunderstanding over the years. And there are a lot of knee-jerk reactions to the term cross-dressing that people tend to have immediately, and certain images that tend to pop up in individuals' heads. So I think it's really important to talk about it, to break it down into parts, to also in so many ways brings the gender bending aspect back into the culture. The reality is that all of us gender bend one way or another, whether we realize it or not. And I just think when it becomes maybe more obvious to a general public, suddenly then it becomes a little bit of a crossover issue. So It's hard to define in general what it means. I would say that I can only speak to what it means to me personally. To me personally, it means when I strongly gender band in my presentation. But I wouldn't be surprised if that means different things to different people.
Yeah, we found that in sort of with the people in our community that it really does mean different things to different people. I think again, what it used to be and what it means now, again, to different people, different things. We've found a big proportion of our community who are over the age of maybe sort of 60 are identifying now that they would potentially or are a trans woman, but have never had the opportunity to transition due to, you know, historical issues around that. They've lived their life being trapped in the wrong body. They've, you know, worked their life, they've been in relationships, they've got children. And I think they're finding at this time, at a time where there is more acceptance and understanding around it, that they're not in a position to be able to, you know, to transition and live their life authentically, which is really sad that that's a realization that they're having, which is why I find what we're doing and being able to bring all different conversations and viewpoints in about the sort of gender spectrum really is to be able to provide people with that information. Because again, when people are exploring, like you say, people sometimes do it as an exploration. Sometimes that does lead to discovering things about your identity, and sometimes it doesn't. They do it for different reasons. So yeah, I suppose really a lot of the misconceptions that we've come across is people people think that when people cross-dress it does mean they're trans, which we obviously know not to be the case. It can lead to that. But as you say, I think very rightly so, for trans women, it does then become a bit, you don't want to be compared to somebody who's doing it part-time as a choice for different reasons when they've, you know, gone through their journey to get where they are now. And I do think the term cross-dressing will potentially become outdated and it will be something else in the future. Is that some of the misconceptions you've found around cross-dressing?
Yeah, these are pretty similar things that I find too. One of the main ones is if somebody engages in these behaviors, they're definitely in denial, they're repressed, they're not in touch with their gender identity, which I found to be not true at all. As you mentioned, there are definitely people who are unaware, for whom this is the first step, for whom this is the first step that feels safe, that feels less fearful, less terrifying to take, that later maybe is going to open up to something else. But for a lot of other people, it doesn't. And I just think that this is primarily one of the biggest misconceptions. The second biggest misconception about the behavior of cross-dressing is that people who do it are doing it for sexual pleasure. And because they're primarily male assigned at birth and they're doing it for sexual pleasure, there must be something deviant or something and this is again goes to this very stereotypically heteronormative views and societal perceptions. And that is also absolutely not true. I know a lot of people who cross-dress because it allows them a creative output, or because it just feels really good, or it feels relieving, or just because they want to. And so when I see people and when I see people who engage in this behavior starting to get really conflicted, because suddenly when you are getting exposed to majority of people who perceive this behavior from those vantage points, it's very quick for you to go into this headspace of paranoia. What does it mean for me? Why am I engaged in this behavior? So I really encourage people who are gender bending to, instead of trying to zone in what cross-dressing means, and maybe even what it means for them, just forget the definition. Just notice how your body and you feel when you gender bend. What is it about it that is pulling you? What is it about it that feels good? What is it about it that maybe feels erotic or exciting? What is it about it that feels creative? What is it about it that gives you a sense of freedom? How does it connect you to yourself? So I think when we start looking at it as a behavior tied to expression of the self, just like I woke up today, I knew I was going to have this podcast with you. I thought about what I was going to wear. Black is my color. So I picked out a black dress. I love gold jewelry, right? All of the things, the red lipstick, the haircut, their expression, their extension of how I see myself, right? And so I really encourage for people to start thinking and looking at that behavior less of something I got to do in a secrecy. And I know that a lot of people don't do it in a secrecy too. And more to, this is something that I do and it gives me joy, and just zone into the feeling behind it versus getting so wrapped up in your head about, to this group of people, it means that I'm trans for sure. And am I really trans? Do I really have gender dysphoria? To this group of people, that means that I'm sexually provocative and engaging in some kind of taboo behavior. And is that really what's going on? I really engage to just block all of that noise out and just center it in the sense of, how does it feel for you? I think that's way, way more important, because otherwise it becomes too many cooks in the kitchen.
Absolutely. And I think one of the biggest things we find is when people who gender bend, when they cross dress, however we want to describe it, they come out to their family, their partners, their wives. It's really difficult because obviously there is some misconceptions there. I know when Harry came out to me, and I feel quite sort of naive and almost awful, really, that I didn't really understand or even know that it was a thing. I knew, trans people existed. I've always been an ally of the LGBTQ plus community, but cross-dressing itself was completely new to me. Obviously, I was aware of drag artists and things like that, but not in the way that Harry had obviously explained it to me. So there was the misconceptions there and a lot of learning for me, but at the same time there was a lot of learning for Harry, and it was a really difficult time because he, like you've just explained about, going away and trying not to fit yourself into this group of people, try and find out what it means for you. And I suppose as a wife, it was really difficult because Harry wasn't able to answer those questions about what it meant for him, which meant I couldn't get the answers that I needed for me. And I think that was really one of our main reasons behind starting Crossdressed UK, was to try and give as much information as we could in a way that was safe, because I know when we went out looking for information, there was very much this thing around, oh, it means you're trans, or actually it's a fetish. And then there were different people who felt different things about it. And it was quite frightening, really, for me particularly. Harry had obviously lived with this most of his life. But for me, it was brand new, and I was trying to find all the answers and all the information. And depending where you looked, it was really quite frightening. Which was why it was so important to us to try and have these conversations with people, to get the information out there for people who are going through something similar. So it doesn't become this big, consuming, I need to put a label on it, I need to decide what that means for me right at this moment and what it means for our relationship right at this moment. That's a really difficult thing I think people struggle with, because quite often when people come out to their loved one, they are, I suppose, starting their own journey out. And what does that mean for them? But then you have the loved one there saying, what does this mean for us? And it's sort of trying to figure things out separately, but also together in a relationship. And I think that's why just having the information and, the conversations out there is so important, to try and help people not feel so despairing and so distressed, which is how, I think me and Harry felt at the time. So yeah, I think, and like you say, there's so many different reasons why people do it, and it's personal for everybody, isn't it? There might be a bit of this and a bit of that, but everybody's, different, and you can't put yourself in the same category as everybody else, can you? So
Yeah.
yeah.
Sorry, I was going to mention that it's interesting because we never talk about female assigned at birth, gender bending, very strongly, because it's so permissible. But we're always on male assigned at birth. And I really encourage for people to notice that there's difference between being in search of a meaning, what does it mean for me and my partner, versus in search of a label, in search of a box, in search of a container. because meaning can evolve. And a lot of times, meaning, you can sit with uncertainty of the meaning. You can sit with the unknown. You can just say, I don't know what it means. And maybe right now, I don't need to know what it means. It's not harmful. It doesn't challenge any parameters of my relationship if I'm in a relationship. It is something that I personally enjoy. And sometimes we need to ask ourselves, maybe that's enough. I have so many people reach out to me, especially older adults, who are enjoying some form of gender bending behavior and who are so stuck in their heads on what does it mean? Does it mean I have to transition? Does it mean I'm trans? Does it mean it's just a sexual fetish? Which is another side of it, right? The demonization of the word fetish and demonization of people being sexually expensive in their practices and in their interests. And I really encourage people to just think about, instead of jumping to conclusions and to boxes and labels, just allow yourself to enjoy it and see what naturally unfolds. Things naturally, eventually, especially once you stop searching, interestingly, something starts to open up. And maybe it doesn't, but it definitely helps to get out of the headspace. So I just wanted to add that as well.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. I think sometimes you can be overloaded with too much information, can't you? If you go and you know, consume everything that's out there, you could end up more confused. I really like the way you've put that about sometimes just sort of letting it naturally unfold. Um, yeah. Obviously, there is, as you've mentioned, the fetish side of it, and I do think that is one of the reasons we've come across that people frown upon, if you like, cross-dressing, because again, it was historically, wasn't it, considered a mental health condition, and it was considered to be a fetish, um, because that was something separate to gender identity. We know that that's obviously changed. Um, what do you see as the difference? Do you sort of have any advice on how the whys and the hows of why people do it for that reason or another reason?
For sexual gratification, I think the reasons are very personal. They're very multitude. The way that I look at it is, why shouldn't it feel erotic? I think it's really exciting. Closes and shifting the way we perceive ourselves in the context of our intimacy, whether we're intimate with our own bodies or we're intimate with a partner. That type of play is incredibly exciting. And for people who've never done it, I really encourage them to try some kind of shift in the way they show up in intimacy, because it does change things, right? I mean, this is why a lot of times certain things are very exciting to people. For example, why don't you wear a police uniform, or why don't you bring handcuffs in a bedroom, right? Or why don't you wear, for example, why do people wear lingerie? Why do people choose lace? Why do people choose sister lace? All of those things, they do something to our desires, and certain things more than others. So to me, I find that it's natural to be erotomized by gender bending. And I can understand how it is erotomized to a lot of people. So I don't know if I'm really answering your question, but in terms of why it's erotic, that's so subjective, right? Because to somebody, what might be really erotic is just putting on a shade of lipstick. For somebody, what might be really erotic is just putting on feminine stockings. For somebody else, what might be erotic is, fully feminizing to have a full feminine effect. It really, really varies, and it's very different. For somebody, what is erotic is not even doing anything in terms of gender bending, but you're gender bending in care, in fantasy, and you're imagining things. So it's very different. All I can say is, from psychological point of view, from my point of view, I think it's a very healthy part of one's sexuality. And I don't think it's something to feel shame or guilt about. And I certainly don't think this is something that needs to be locked away or put away or get some kind of treatment for. To me, it is just as natural as being completely in nude during sexual encounter, during personal intimacy. So that's pretty much all I can say. Just normalizing it, because I don't even know how we got to the point where it's not, because I don't see anything unnatural, let's put it that way, about it.
Yeah, I think what you've just said there is really interesting because everybody has different desires and fantasies and the way they kind of feel in those intimate moments, either by themselves or with a partner. And it seems that some things are more accepted by certain people than others. And I think that's obviously a lot to do with society and the way we've almost been told, we've been sort of molded into that's okay and that's not. And again, I think it depends because there's some people would find things that were considered, shall we say, considered normal. Um, they'd find that even too much. You know, they don't want to sort of
Mhm.
think about that. They'd get quite embarrassed about that. But yeah, I think it is a really good way of putting it. It's very personal to anybody, but it's no different to trying something else in the bedroom. Um, and this is it, isn't it? Um, so yeah, I suppose obviously we've touched on that for some people it is, you know, part of their sexual um exploration and can be considered a fetish, although sometimes that word's not always the most pleasant way to put it because again there's quite often stigma attached to that, isn't there? Um we've spoken with a lot of people who are trans. They are trans women. They identify as trans, but often started out as cross dressers, which kind of goes naturally with that because I'm sure you know when you're exploring that gender expression side, you want to you know present in certain ways, don't you? What do you think the overlap is from a psychological perspective from cross dressing to you know becoming deciding that you know that you are actually transgender? Yeah.
Like you said, it's inevitable for anybody that carries internal feminine identity at some point to not step into gender bending. There's natural pull, almost like gravitational pull. If you have innate feminine identity, there's going to pull you towards feminine, stereotypical clothing, objects, items. And so I think it's inevitable for a lot of people who are on a journey of exploring who they are to, at some point in their life, to engage in feminizing. What happens for a lot of people is, and clearly this is up to their level of awareness, right? So the less aware you are, meaning the more you are maybe in denial or in repression about the gender identity, the less likely you're going to connect the dots. The more you maybe see this behavior as something other than related to gender identity, and maybe you're going to tie it to a particular function, like, oh, I noticed it is sexually appealing to me, so it must be just a sexual thing for me. Or, oh, I noticed that it gives me a sense of calm, so this is kind of a sex reduction things that I do over here. As time goes on, some people realize that something else going on. The function of the behavior shifts. Suddenly, it's no longer gives you the same gratification, or it's no longer gives you peace. Suddenly, you notice you want to do more. Suddenly, you notice that outside of container of feminizing, when you are living your life in your assigned gender, you notice that you actually need to be back in a container. You notice that you want the container to be now a big part of your life. You notice that you want it to be entire life. And that's when people start really asking themselves, okay, what's going on there? Because usually if it, in terms of behavior and in terms of somebody who gender bends just because for numerous personal reasons, let's put it that way, oftentimes it exists in this container, right? So meaning maybe I have this particular day of the week or every evening or every month or any random time I wish, I can feminize and I enjoy it. And then I'm done, I'm finished. And this part of this behavior that I love so much doesn't affect the rest of my daily life. For individuals for whom there might be something else going on, and it could be trans identity, or it could be that now maybe there's a part of you that is leaning more feminine too, or it could be that over time there's this fluidity more to gender because gender is a spectrum. For those individuals, the container starts to broaden up. It starts to expand in other areas of your life. And that's becomes one of the telling signs that, okay, so there might be something else going on. And again, people usually tend to really get terrified when they think there's something else going on, because when people think about trans identity, especially if it's been repressed, especially if you've been in denial, your brain makes a huge leap to, oh my God, I'm trans woman. That means I have to transition. That means I have to change my life. That means I have to come out to everybody. And that's a very scary, dramatic leap. Instead, I encourage people to reel that in, because not everybody is going to transition, and transition is not for everybody. And you may realize it's not worth it for you at this point in your life, but you may realize you're medically unable to do it, or you may realize you're financially not able to do it. So I encourage people, instead of making the slip, to just again sit with what's happening now. Okay, I'm thinking about feminizing much more than I often do. I'm sitting at my desk behind my work, and all I can think about is myself as a woman. What does that mean? How can I acknowledge that? Um, how can I start cultivating a relationship with that part of myself? So that's what I really encourage people to do. But yeah, it's a layered multitude in terms of when a behavior starts and how it may potentially tie and link to a gender identity. And the link is not direct link for everybody. And a lot of times the link can go in multitude of ways. And that's where it gets a little bit complex. This is why I don't like when people say, oh, I went on Reddit or I went on some other Facebook group and I told people that I've been cross-dressing for X amount of years, and everybody told me, oh, yeah, you're a trans woman. Oh, yeah, you're just trans. Oh, yeah, you're just in denial. Oh, you're just repressing. It's such a reductionistic way to look at the complexity of human experience that it does a huge disservice. And then again, those words, they start messing with your head. And all you think about is it possible? Is this what's happening on? When in reality, a lot of things could happen. I had a lot of people reach out to me, same concern. And after a few sessions, realize that no, you're not having any current incongruency with your assigned gender. You're totally comfortable. This is just something that you do that you really enjoy, and you should continue to enjoy doing it. And you should just really not listen to everybody else who tells you it's something else, but listen to yourself. Right now, it's enough. Right now, it gives you this sense of purpose. So why don't we just stay with that instead of trying to make it something that it's not?
Yeah. I really like the way you've put that, because I think it makes so much sense when you say that. But I think for a lot of people in the community, there's so much shame
Mhm.
and guilt attached to exploring that side, and which is why a lot of it is done in secret. Because again, I think there is that stigma attached within society, but I think also people have a lot of internalized shame, don't they? Whether that's just with exploring gender, or whether that is, potentially exploring how you sort of your gender identity itself. Um, and I think what we've seen quite often, and when we've spoken to people, is there's the shame, there's the guilt. They get into then a purging cycle, and it becomes quite difficult because they then get rid of everything. They try and repress it. Um, Again, that's something we see a lot where people talk about in relationships where they've tried to repress it. They've been given an ultimatum by a wife or partner and have been told, you can't do that. That's not okay. I'm not, if you want to stay in this relationship, then it needs to end. And they try to repress it, but actually it ends up making them feel quite miserable. Um, and quite often when people have purged, it's not a one-time thing, is it? It's something that, they go through that cycle and then it starts again. Why do you think, other than obviously the societal sort of pressures and misconceptions around it, what's your experience with people who sort of have that sense of shame and guilt and sort of carry on that purging cycle?
Yeah, the binge and purge cycle is so, so, so common and can be so costly too. I always tell people, just get a storage, put it in a box, put it somewhere away, put it out of sight, out of mind. Um, a lot of it does comes from shame and guilt. A lot of it does comes from societal um, ideas that what you're engaging in is a taboo. What you're engaging in is promiscuous. What you're engaging in is a sexual fetish, and that's not a good thing. Um, and as a result, an individual, when they engage in the behavior, they have, I call a shame guilt cycle, where they engage in the behavior, it feels so, so good. And then after feeling so good, what follows is this feelings of shame. What am I doing? Why am I doing this? I'm told that I'm not supposed to do it. In our society, it's really, I don't even want to say the words out loud. It's really bad when you engage in this behavior. And so then the shame and guilt follows, and then the person just wants to rid themselves of those feelings. And that's what the purging is really about. The purging is a metaphor of getting rid of those feelings, because you think into your headspace that getting rid of all the clothes and everything is an act of getting rid of the feelings. But the feelings are remaining there. You don't get rid of the feelings by purging. You get rid of the feelings by unlearning everything you learned societally about this and realizing that all of these ideas that a man should not cross dress, that sexually it's taboo and it's bad and something is wrong with you. A lot of it really comes from Christian ideas. A lot of it comes from this very heteronormative white culture, whitewashed ideas that a marriage is between man and a woman, and a woman has to be submissive, and a man has to be dominant, and woman is subservient to the man. And if you're sexually feminizing, something is very wrong with you. There's also a big concept of, and I don't know if you're probably aware of this, Ray Blanchard theory of aftergonophilia that was brought up as that brought tremendous amount of shame and guilt in individuals. And so it really starts with unlearning and realizing where all of that garbage comes from. And what is all of that garbage intended to do, and how it intended to keep you stuck within your desires and stuck within your natural unfoldment of the spectrum of not only your sexuality, but your gender too. And so once you realize that, it helps this purging and binging, but that's the underneath the purging and binging, but it doesn't go away, because like that cycle, you get rid of the things, but then what happens again? You want to feel good again. And so when you feel good again, you do it again. It's a similar cycle. Um, I, I make analogy a lot of times to eating behaviors and overeating behaviors, because there's so many similarities, right? You want something so bad, but you've been told you shouldn't have it, right? And you've been told that if you eat the cakes and all of the things come, especially for women in our society, all the things come in a headspace, right? That if you eat that cake, you're a fat pig, and all of the things come in. And so you restrict it for yourself, but the desire is there, and then you can't help but to have it, and then you feel guilt and shame, and so you throw it in a garbage can, right? You never want to see it again, so you abstain from it for a month, and then the cycle starts again. Versus normalizing that you like sweets, normalizing that sometimes you crave sweets, and finding a way how to incorporate that into your lifestyle. So it's the same way, but the shame and guilt is horrific in a community of people who gender bend in general. And it really interferes, it creates a lot of blockage from even allowing yourself to explore why you're engaging in this behavior. Why is this so enjoyable to you? Um, I really, I see shame and guilt, it's such a nasty beast, and it becomes very challenging to detox for a lot of people. And I always encourage your people to see if you can, especially today with AI and ChatGPT, see if you can start pulling on the history of how this behavior became demonized. What is the history behind it? What are particular majority groups that are demonizing this behavior, and why? What is the vantage point for them to make you look bad? Why does it want people not to gender bend? Why does it want everybody to stay in a line? Once you start really unlearning all of it, you realize just how caged up you have been, and that can help in of itself tremendously.
I really relate to that, obviously from a slightly different perspective, but when obviously Harry came out to me, I feel like that's probably been the most interesting part of our journey together, has been that unlearning, and but then really finding out around the history of gender norms, you know, and where these sort of ideas came from. Because, you know, as you'll know more than me, that historically there wasn't really an issue. Everybody, there was trousers didn't used to exist. You know, everybody used to wear sort of robes or dresses, as you would, you know, as you would say now. Um, Again with the different colours as well. You know, blue was seen as quite feminine and
Mm-hmm.
quite dainty. You know, those reds and sort of almost pinks was around power and masculinity, and that's shifted over time. And for me, just looking at that sort of gender norms through history has been so interesting, and things I never even would have thought of. And then you sort of sit with that and think, yeah, the way I'm thinking about this is how I've been told I should think about it. But when you actually break that down a little bit, is it the big deal that I thought it was? No, no, it's not. And that was a really big realization for me, was going through that history and sort of unlearning the things, as you say. And it really helped us move forward in our relationship and have that understanding around what it meant. So I do think, like you say, if people can sort of really find, you know, go through the history and do that unlearning, it will really change how people see themselves or see, you know, gender in general. So yeah. Um, so you've talked about the biggest misconceptions. What would you say to somebody who right now is struggling with the idea of cross-dressing, gender exploration? What would be the one thing you would tell them to go away and do? Other, you've just obviously answered about going away and finding out the history. Do you recommend therapy? Do you recommend, you know, how would you sort of, what would you say to somebody who says, I cross-dress and I'm struggling and I don't know what to do?
Yeah. If they're able to, look, therapy today is a luxury, period. Right? It's no longer a medical access. It's pure luxury. At least in the United States, it is definitely a luxury. If a person is able to get therapy, I think that's a great start. But even with that, I would still caution, because even a therapist can also get into your head, right? So what I would encourage is first to s- see how you can start having an inner inquiry into yourself. It's giving you distress. Distress how? Is it giving you distress because when you are feminizing, you're feeling shame and guilt because you've been told throughout your lifetime this is not something that people are supposed to be doing? So that's one stress, right? Is it distress because when you are engaging and you're done, you're sitting there wondering, what does it all mean for me? A bigger implication? Is it distress because once you're done throughout the day, you're thinking about it and now you're wondering how much it has to do with your gender identity, right? So, and then there's probably some other levels of distress as well. Are you distressed because you're in a relationship and your partner doesn't even know this side of you, right? And you're hiding. And so the idea that you're keeping this a secret is really interfering with your conception of relational trust and integrity of the relationship. Is that how it's eating on you and causing you distress? So everybody has a different level of distress. I encourage first, before even jumping into therapy or any kind of conclusion, just what is a distress? A lot of times I think
Mhm.
people feel something and then they immediately have knee-jerk reaction versus, okay, but what is this feeling telling me? So I really encourage first to just kind of go into inward, have this internal inquiry. If somebody can have access to a therapy, it's I would really recommend just to explore more and not to be afraid to explore. What is the worst thing you're going to find out? What is the worst thing you can possibly find out? That is very sexually erotic for you and you love it, and that's your number one sexual preference in the midst of your sexual preferences. Okay. Are you going to find out that there's a part of you that has fluidity and the feminine part likes to show up more in your life. Okay. And you're going to find out that maybe there's a repressed transgender identity. Okay. Realize that whatever you're going to find out, it's just information. You don't have to act on it. You don't have to suddenly, put a banner up in your whole world, personal ecosystem of the world, and share with everybody what you found out. You don't have to jump to any kind of steps, especially if you feel like it's part of your identity. You just have to sit with it and then find out, what does it mean for me? There's a lot of things we find out throughout our development, especially through the part of unlearning all this cultural garbage that we carry. I for certainly do, especially as a woman in my 40s. There's so much unlearning I've been doing in terms of what I've been told, how to show up, how to speak, um, how to be visible, how to present myself, the beauty standards. I mean, we can go on and on and on, right? And it's a matter of realizing what those things are telling you, sitting with them, and then allowing them to naturally inform the next steps. So that's what I would recommend. I would recommend just not to panic, you know? There's nothing wrong with this behavior. You're not deviant. You're not if this behavior seems simple to somebody else, it's only a byproduct of our cultural restricted perceptive views. I really just encourage have this internal inquiry and just, okay, I feel distress. What kind of distress? And just be inquisitive.
Yeah, I really love the way you've put that. That's quite, I think a lot of people, they feel they need to have the answers and make a decision. Um, and as you've said there, sometimes it is just about understanding how that feels, why you feel the way you feel, and you don't have to announce it to the world. You don't have to make a decision or act on anything. It's just that sort of, yeah. And I think so many people feel the way they feel because of how society views things, and sometimes when you take that away, and I know myself from how I've learned about gender exploration and expression, that actually most of what we perceive is has come from what society has told us we should think, and actually when you strip that away, um, those feelings are very different. So yeah. Is there anything else that you want to add or share with the community before we finish?
I would want to share that I really would encourage everybody to explore gender bending. I think exploration in regards to especially gender is so important, and not so much because I believe everybody is transgender or everybody is gender fluid or non-binary. Um, I'm pretty binary identified as a woman. There is a lot of gender bending to me, but it's gender bending in regards to my expression versus to how I see myself. So there are definitely people out there who are very strongly binary identified and will continue to be identified. But exploring gender bending behavior not only helps them have a wider perspective of how it makes them feel, and maybe as a result, having a wider perspective how it might make somebody else feel. But I just think it's fun. I think it's so. It reminds me when we were little kids, right? Kids gender bend all the time. They always gender
Yeah.
bend, and somehow when kids gender bend, it is more permissible. Although not always, right? There's could be still a parent that scorns, that thinks it's inappropriate. But for Halloween, and when Halloween here in the United States, and when I have kids on my doorsteps, I see a lot of gender bending. And it's right, it's permissible because it's costume, it's Halloween, it's within those restrictions. But somehow we lost the touch with that fun aspect of gender bending. So what I would want to tell everybody is don't be afraid to gender bend. If you have a feminine identity, it's going to come to the surface whether you gender bend or don't. It's just going to come up with it. You cannot keep something so integral to yourself away from yourself for so long. If you don't have trans identity, nothing is going to come to the surface. What's going to come up is excitement and curiosity and fun. And I also want to encourage the viewers not to panic, not to be quick to put themselves in a box, not to be quick to assume that because it might be something related to your identity, that means you have to take all of the steps towards that identity. You don't. There's a lot of things out there. And especially if you don't have distress, if you don't have presence of dysphoria, or if the dysphoria is very mild, you may decide not to do anything for a long time or forever. All of this is valid. There's such a big range in terms of how to navigate your own relationship to yourself. And I think that's really important, because we get so stuck in linear cause-effect conclusions, right? This behavior means this, and cheer for that means this, versus a more broader spectrum of sitting with the experience. So I want to leave viewers with that, because I think that's really important. I think a lot of people who engage, in my experience, who engage in feminizing, for a lot of people in the back of their heads, there's always this big question mark. Does it mean I'm trans? Does it mean I'm trans? And I just really encourage to just put it to rest. Again, if there's feminine identity, it's going to come up one way or another. It's going to come up. Don't force things that are not there yet. Don't force things that you're not ready for. And don't force things that may never even be there to begin with.
Well, that's great. Thank you so much for your time today. And you know, your really useful insight there. I think this video, you know, will be really useful for a lot of people in our community. So yeah, we really appreciate you taking the time out to speak with us today. What we'll do is we will link your website and your socials on in the description of the video and on the podcast, so other people can find you. And yeah, so thank you so much for your time today. It's been great meeting you.
Thank you for having me.
All right, bye.
Bye.
Just want to say a huge thank you again to Dr. Z for joining us today for what was a really thoughtful and insightful conversation around gender exploration and cross-dressing. If you want to hear more from Dr. Z, we'll include all the details in the description below and on our website. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you again in the next video. And remember, you are not alone, you are valid, you are welcome.